Okay, good. So my name is Yoann Sculo. Tonight we'll speak about production in China and all the problems you can encounter when you are a developer and in production. So, just to introduce myself very quickly. So I'm an embedded Linux engineer. So I've been working on several consumer electronic devices. So my job is to develop operating system with Linux and mainly conceive and develop them and mainly handling testing tools in production, so to be sure everything is okay in production, that it's okay before shipping it to our warehouses. So tonight I'll speak about all the problems I can face in my job and all the specifics and on the developer point of view. So I'll speak about my own experience and just please note that I have nothing against China, and this is just from you'll get a glimpse of what I've experienced, and I think it won't reflect the whole market over there, but it's a bit it's a first glimpse for you. Okay. Working with China it can be pretty ugly or very stressful. So let's see why. So the first big cultural difference with China is the language. We don't speak the same language. So it can be very difficult to understand each other with emails or conf calls. The harder part is just getting people on the phone, so generally we don't understand each other. Pretty often we get documentation in Chinese, so when we can translate it, it's pretty good, but sometimes it's embedded in images, so you can't translate them, so it can be pretty hard to understand. And a second interesting point is they don't always feel the implicit in your demand or your sentences. So sometimes you can ask, "Can you do it?" and they say yes, and you were just expecting that they do something, but it doesn't work. Recently, I had to set a new step in the production line, so it involved using a screwdriver just to set a resistor value. And the guy in front of me, I asked them when can we do that in production, at which moment, and the guy said when the device is open. And I think it was not what I meant, and I was wondering how we could do that together and how. So it's pretty difficult. Sometimes it's pretty difficult. We are in some kind of bubbles and we don't understand each other. So when you communicate with China, you need to be very, very clear and very concise. You don't send huge emails, and you need to make very short sentences. So it's very important, because pretty often you won't have any answer if your email are too complicated. So the first big problem when you are an embedded Linux engineer with China is that everything is Microsoft in China. So all the production and flashing tools are using Windows XP. So there is lots of viruses everywhere. So they are using USB keys, and viruses are everywhere. So sometimes it happens. The viruses can just end up in the final product for the consumer. So it happens a lot. So you very need to be careful with viruses when you deal with production. So you always have funky files, funky releases file. A funny thing is I'm using, I've seen recently Allwinner, the Allwinner loader, which is using DOS system to name partitions. So you have partition using C, semicolon, slash, D, E, just to name partitions on the node. So it's pretty odd. So everything is Microsoft. So when you deal with China, you need a computer, a Windows computer, and pretty often you need a real computer because you will have many problems with drivers, because pretty often they have funky tools and drivers don't work if you are using a VM or Wine. If you need to develop production tools, you need portable language as much as possible, because it will be such a pain to use that in production. And very be careful with viruses, because it can be such a mess if you deliver a product to consumer with viruses. When we deal with OEM, so it's company that send you products to customize. Sometimes you get very shit code source code. So recently I got source code without any versioning system. So there is no Unix culture, so they don't send patches. It's only source code, so you need to do the patch yourself. This is the wrong file format, so there is it's always those. There is always comments in Chinese, and when you're not lucky, it's the wrong encoding, so you don't understand anything. You can't translate the comments. I got very awful drivers. So, for instance, I was working. I got a patch which was using a BusyBox, applet to mount partitions on the node and to move files. It was, for instance, serials and MAC addresses, if I recall, and just directly from a display driver. So it was pretty odd, and the source code is pretty shitty. And with the screwdriver thing, they sent me a patch just to set a voltage, and they sent me a patch with only an infinite loop just to set a value with the screwdriver. But once the value is set, the product is bricked, so we can't update the device. So it's like that every day. Okay. When you deal, with very low cost electronics, you get sometimes pretty odd layouts. But I don't think the picture are not very good. But sometimes you get very strange things. So, for instance, I don't know, we have several levels just to put the USB connectors. Pretty weird. But the picture are not very relevant. So it's only the picture I found just for the presentation. It happens pretty often that connectors are upside down, and you need to check that, because you can't see that. But if you don't check it on production, it can be a mess if you get that at the end for the consumers. Color coding, they don't do that, so just be careful, because they don't use the proper color for wires. Sometimes they don't map pins for some components. So, for instance, if you have a touchscreen and it happens you have a problem later with the customer, but if the pin is not wired, you can't upgrade the firmware to fix the problem. So sometimes you need to be careful and check what they have done with the layout, and just be careful. When I was working on the small rabbit, the carrots, we had a problem with the soldering machine, and it was just creating big packets of soldering on the PCB, and instead of fixing the machine, they used people at the end of the line just to scratch the PCB and to remove soldering. So it's how they work, and we don't work the same way. So sometimes it can be very how to work with them because we don't expect the same thing. So when you deal with production and you need to check your hardware, you need a production tool because you need to find and even rework your device before it's closed and shipped to your warehouse, because it can be very difficult for your company to handle the high cost of reworking afterwards. So our countries are very far away, so we have two problems with that. First, time zone. So China is 7 hours ahead currently. At 1 p.m. Discussion is over, so you need to be very careful not to miss the point. And if you miss the point, you can waste your whole day because you need to wait for another day to be in contact with your with people over there. And yeah, you need to be very careful. It's pretty stressful. The second point is there are crappy internet connection. So it depends on the factory and the time of the day, but you can have very slow connection. And when you need to send, for instance, marketing content or pictures, HD movies, it can take some hours just to send content, and then they need to download it. A second point about internet connection is on production lines they don't have internet usually, so you need to deal with offline software. So if you need to set up to insert MAC addresses or several numbers, you need to think differently because you won't have internet always on the line of production. So when you deal with China, you need to communicate on morning and then you work on the afternoon. And if you have something for them to test, just send it at the end of your day, so they will test it and give you feedback before you begin your day. And always, you need to keep in mind that their day is just finishing at just afternoon, and so you need to be very quick in the morning. With a very crappy connection, you need to plan ahead firmware uploads, so you need to take your time and just to be sure everything is okay before sending a new firmware. And with the problem with the internet connection on the line, you need to think offline as much as possible. People on the line of production are not likely to be educated, so pretty often they don't speak English. So it can be very hard to understand in your software. You need to deal with that. For instance, when I was working on the Arcos TV Connect, this is a small set-top box, I had to set up tests for the microphones on the production, and I was using some feedback on the TV with the HDMI port. And the problem is I was just using feedback with 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers to indicate the microphones. And they said it was not possible because people on the line don't understand 1, 2, 3, 4. So you need to use Chinese or colors or shapes, but you can't use English. A second point to show how difficult it can be is more recently I was on the e-readers. I was installing a calibration tool just to be sure the touch screen was working well, and it was just 5 squares on the screen just to touch, and for us it was pretty much it was working well. But in China, they told us it was not working. They had big problems, and we didn't understand why. And actually, they were touching everywhere, but in the squares. So it's sometimes you don't expect the same thing, and it can be very difficult. So you always need to keep in mind they don't always speak English, and if you can, you use Chinese, and if you can't, just use shapes or colors. And you need to guide them as much as possible, and the more important thing is to automate things as much as possible, so to avoid problems before they appear. So another problem is there is a huge rush period between June and January. So the first problem is Christmas. So usually companies need devices in the store in November. So, and because there is a CES in January, you have basically problems until January. So January to fix problem while the product is is showing in the CES. So you forget holidays in summer, January. And a second point is the Asian holidays. So they have pretty often holidays, and usually when they have holidays, this is a huge blackout in China. So you can't use the production, and so there is the worst one is in October, because it's just before Christmas, and if you have your product stuck in customs, it can be such a pain, because everything you will be gathering in customs, and you won't get your stuff back until some weeks. So you don't need to, you must ship before that period. So when you deal with China like that, you forget quite August, peaceful summers, and if you can, you just work in pair to be able to take holidays, because if you can't, it's holidays in February or February to April.
Question for you. Can you come back to the other slide, please?
Sure.
So what are those Asian periods you're talking about? Spring Festival, I think it's spring, but what is Qingming?
I don't remember so much. So it's pretty much organized in the whole
for
year.
Each of them, it's like a whole week?
It depends, but pretty often it's 2 days to 1 week. It depends on I think people, and can be. It depends on factories actually. So sometimes it's 1 week, and late October it was 1 week. So everything is blacked out at the time.
So you have to schedule about a week for each of them. So
yes.
To be sure.
Okay. So okay, I did it. And last point, when you deal with hardware, you will have your hardware that will change. So first, the bill of materials, to make very small or to make just money, to save some money, you will need to change components, and just at the end it will be a big deal and big amount of money. So it will change. Sometimes your factories will run out of components, so you will need to find new ones, pin-to-pin compatibles, and so you need to find new drivers, and so it will change. The second point is the PCB layout. If you will have hardware problems, so you will need to fix them, have new revisions, and if you are lucky, it will last some years, but you will have many revisions to handle. So when you deal with hardware, you must expect always to have problems in the future and to handle many revisions. So you need to think from the start you need to think very modular and just as maintainable as possible. So so everything can be planned before you have problems. So dealing with China is pretty much stressful and frustrating, because it's very hard to communicate and to understand each other. But everything is over there, so the whole market is over there. They are very good at what they do. So when you need to plan a new factory line, it's pretty easy to do that over there. But in France, it's pretty much difficult, and the cost will be higher, and this is a very big competition with very high competitors, and it will be, if you move your factory in France, you will be very far away, and when you need to source new components, it will be very difficult, because you need to plan long before you need your components, and it can be very difficult, and if you have any issue, your production is pretty much stopped, and it cannot be like that. So it's very hard to deal with China, but we don't have the choice if you want to compete with Amazon or Apple sometimes. And just to finish, the first quote I put on the first slide, I was talking with one of my Chinese contacts, and on Skype, his sentence on the just with his login was, the problem is we don't understand the problem, and it made me pretty much laugh because it's exactly the problem we face. We don't understand each other. It's pretty much difficult to speak, and just and dealing with China is pretty much like that. It's very hard to understand. So thank you. It was just credits on the picture.
Thank you, Yoann. Do you have a question for Yoann?
Yeah, can you do like what Raspberry Pi did and ever produce in England or France? They did it on a huge basis, so is it out of the question? Or?
I don't know for factories in England, but in France it's pretty much, the price is very high. So if maybe you know the tablet, the Cook tablet, actually, the price is very high before they produce in France, and if you take the same product, the same hardware, it will be much cheaper. Maybe if it's maybe twice as the price in China. So maybe I'm wrong, but for products you can produce in France. But
the problem is not just paper. The problem is packaging, plastic, injection molds.
And people on the line, people on the factory.
Yeah, if you want to make a MacBook here in France, you can't. You don't have the factory, whatever you trade.
You're in the factory, you're in the skills, you need parts. It's pretty grim.
Yeah.
So what about other Asian countries? Is there anything easier?
People, it's very flexible. Everything is very fast. So new softwares, new hardware is coming very fast. So you can have very good stuff. You have the
latest chips and things.
Yeah, you have a lot of chips, and they are very good at what they do. So they can do pretty much very quickly new prototypes. So you need a prototype, they can do it in 1, 2, 3 days. It's very fast. Maybe we can do it in France, but I don't know if it's as simple as that.
Did you answer your question?
Yeah.
Was there a cultural issue? I mean, first of all, I know you're speaking English, you're kind of expecting the other guys to speak English because somehow they work in computers and everything. But do you think that there was another aspect of your relationship with your Chinese sourcing people that made it very difficult for you to communicate with them, besides the English? I mean,
besides the English, I never went into China. I'm pretty much avoiding going over there because it's not pretty fun to be in the Shenzhen suburbs. It's because for instance, they never say no, or they're always feeling like, sorry, how could I say that?
Tu peux y aller en français, hein, je pense que la majorité d'entre nous qui peuvent.
Oui, je pense qu'en fait, ils s'énervent jamais, donc en fait, ils vont toujours être oui, et en fait, derrière, ils vont intérioriser. Et ça peut être assez problématique parce que ça peut ralentir la communication.
Ils te diront jamais non.
Bah, ils vont toujours ils diront jamais non. Donc on peut leur dire que vous avez fait ça. Oui, vous l'avez vraiment fait, oui, et puis on vérifie, ils l'ont pas fait. Donc ça peut être problématique quand il s'agit de lancer de la production, que c'est pas sur les rails et qu'on découvre après que le dernier moment que c'est pas fait.
Et comment est-ce que tu rattrapes ce genre de problème?
Bah, ça peut être difficile, mais en général, ils ont des gens quand même ça dépend des usines, mais en général, ils ont des gens en charge justement des lignes de production qui ont plus cette sensibilité-là, un peu plus européenne et occidentale, donc ça facilite les choses. Mais quand on descend un petit peu les niveaux, c'est un peu plus difficile parce que les gens sont moins, on fait moins d'études, sont moins éduqués, et du coup, la différence culturelle est plus forte.
Je voyais aussi dans ta présentation, tu parlais de couleurs. En fait.
Ouais.
Moi, ça me rappelle vachement des trucs qu'on utilisait pour aider les astronautes, parce qu'en fait, ils ont plein de choses à faire, et tu leur mets des couleurs de partout, ils savent.
C'est rapide.
La question, c'est est-ce que tu peux aller plus loin en mettant des vidéos de façon à ce qu'il n'y ait même pas de communication entre couleurs, à lire un manuel pour voir à quelle couleur correspond.
Après, ça dépend du produit en fait. Parce qu'en général, moi jusqu'à présent, c'était à chaque fois un soft de test sur le produit, donc avec un écran tout bête avec un truc en frame buffer console, tout bête avec juste écrit appuie sur le bouton gauche ou le bouton droit pour yes no, et puis c'est toute une batterie de test, brancher une carte SD, lancer le Wi-Fi, vérifier que vous pouvez vous connecter à un point d'accès, etc. Et donc en fait, en général, il y a des instructions sur le produit ou sur une télé qui est branchée à un HDMI si on a un produit qui n'a pas d'écran. Donc en fait, ça dépend complètement du produit et après de l'usine. Après, j'en ai connu que 4, 5, 6 des usines.
En fait, dans ta présentation, c'est peut-être aussi le moins cher des moins chers des moins chers. Tu as les produits chinois,
voilà, en fait,
les iPhones, ils sont faits en Chine et honnêtement,
oui, voilà.
une bonne qualité.
C'est ça le truc, c'est qu'en fait, quand on veut faire un produit très 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 low cost, on en tire les conséquences. C'est qu'effectivement, on a toute la main-d'œuvre est tirée.
C'est quoi le prix à peu près de ton device?
Là, honnêtement, je sais pas, j'ai pas sur celui-là, j'ai pas les prix et je pense pas qu'il serait d'accord que je communique là-dessus.
Et donc, tu travaillais en France, mais tu allais en Chine?
Non, je suis jamais allé en Chine. J'ai jamais été en Chine puisque j'évite un petit peu aussi puisque ça me, c'est pas, niveau journée, c'est pas le plus fun comme voyage. Ça a l'air d'être quand même bien chargé et il y a rien à faire là-bas donc. Mais non, en général, il y a toujours des personnes qui chapeautent en fait, la production, mais moi je fais plus le rapport avec le soft. Donc dès qu'il faut envoyer les firmware et valider que le produit est OK.
Il n'y a personne de la boîte qui serait en Chine
Si, en fait, ça arrive qu'il y ait des gens ceux qui chapeautent la production, généralement, c'est ceux qui s'occupent plus de la partie montage, la méca
Il y a des gens en local sur place qui bossent pour.
Alors oui,
en
l'occurrence, ça arrive que des gens restent à temps plein là-bas et essayent de chapeauter. C'est vrai que si on ne fait pas ça, ça devient difficile parce que ça peut pas devenir hors de contrôle si on n'a personne sur place.
Vous avez déjà vendu des produits? Vous êtes en phase de... Je veux dire, est-ce que ce modèle-là, il est viable? Parce que c'est bien beau, tu dis ok, c'est 3 fois moins cher. Et si
c'est le cas.
90% de retour...
c'était le cas chez Arcos.
Non, mais je sais pas.
Bah oui, mais c'est aussi un peu bon pour ça que qu'il y a eu le licenciement économique. Disons que après, je pense que les sociétés se cherchent et c'est pas facile d'être compétiteur.
Pour l'instant, ils n'ont rien vendu.
Oui, ça se vend,
le
mais.
produit n'est pas sorti.
Sur les produits Arcos, oui, sur lesquels je travaille. Et le produit sur lequel. Si, il est sorti. Ça marche bien. En fait, c'est juste que en gros, le démarrage est quand même assez laborieux et quand on récupère du soft qui est pas bon. Mais si, c'est sorti.
Can you talk about your work and what is the Linux distribution that you usually deal with and the tool chain?
Generally, it's homemade system just with build root. If you know build root, it creates with build root you can build your own system. You just pick packages you want and you choose your libc and it creates a whole monolithic software and just you put your firmware on your computer on the system and you just need to configure and use the pickup packages you need. And it's always custom distribution, except for Android. But for Android, it was the end user software, and I was working on a homemade system, just running something like using Buildroot, which was pretty much always the same system. But it depends on the company and on the product.
Do you use C or assembler or Python?
Sorry?
Do you use C language or assembler language or Python or
What language?
It's always C, Bash, Shell, and sometimes Python if you need to use software running on Windows, for instance, and on Linux for your production line. It's always like that. It's mainly in C.
is it ever assembler?
Not so much, but sometimes yes, when you deal with very low-level stuff.
But of course, the kernel you have some assembler.
Yes.
But what the kernel and ported by the company which who designed the device? Or?
So actually, it was it's the All-Winner is designed some. It's always like that. You have the big companies that just designing the processor and the provider board support package, and then you have small companies just using that BSP just to provide for our customers.
Tu disais qu'ils ne parlent pas anglais, mais est-ce qu'ils lisent l'anglais?
Ils lisent mieux l'anglais que...
Est-ce qu'ils l'écrivent bien?
Non, ça dépend des gens. Mais du coup, la problématique, c'est des fois, bah là, même ce matin, j'ai envoyé des mails, on est obligé de s'envoyer plusieurs fois. J'ai pas compris ce que vous avez dit. Et généralement, vu que c'est du mauvais anglais, on comprend pas trop. On sait pas si c'était vraiment ce qu'il voulait dire ou si c'est une erreur. Et ça peut réellement poser problème parce que...
C'est pas plus mal anglais que les français, c'est inquiétant.
Ah oui.
Ça dépend, mais ouais, mais c'est pire. Des fois, c'est pire que les français. Donc, ça dépend des gens en fait en face. On peut tomber sur des gens qui sont très très bons. Et,
Ici, il y a beaucoup de turnaround dans l'usine, par exemple, tes interlocuteurs, t'arrives à garder les mêmes.
non, en général, c'est les mêmes pendant. Bon, après, j'ai jamais eu l'occasion de rester longtemps dans la société. À chaque fois, j'ai des licenciements économiques, mais ça, à chaque fois, c'est toujours la même personne, au moins pendant 1 an et demi.
Okay, one last question. Okay, thank you, Yoann.